Hi guys, it's me, ChazzaHD, and welcome to the review of the Canadian Grand Prix weekend. Hope you're all doing well after what was a pretty exciting weekend. Not as exciting as it could have been, but yeah, was still pretty entertaining. Lots of brilliant things came out of it. Shocks, surprises. In the end, of course, the usual winner in terms of team and driver, but yeah, it was another very interesting weekend. Still in 2023, we're yet to have a real classic race, a 9 or almost a 10 out of 10 type of race. Normally you do get at least one of those per season, but yeah, we haven't had one yet. I do think we will get there though, but yeah, yesterday's Canadian Grand Prix was decent, I would say. I still think, with the safety car coming out when it did, which was, I think, was it lap 12? I still think if the safety car, if Russell would not hit the wall, which obviously caused the safety car, I think we would have had a better race that way because the strategy would have been a bit more entertaining and different from what it actually was. I mean, it was still entertaining because you had a few cars stay out and, some cars do different type of things, but yeah, it definitely could have been better. But I hope after yesterday's race, you guys are doing well. And no matter what time zone you're in, what part of the world you're from, hope you're all having as best a day as possible. And in tonight's not very long stream, it's not going to be as long as obviously some of my marathon streams in the last couple of days. I'm going to get into a couple big talking points from the Canadian Grand Prix, which is going to be, firstly, and the main topic, why Aston Martin and Mercedes are catching Red Bull. We'll get into that in a second. And we'll get into Ferrari because despite still not having a good weekend, because they, didn't finish on the podium, which is still unacceptable for a team like them, especially around that circuit, which suited their car way more than some of the circuits we've recently been to. There was very encouraging signs in the race, which obviously was held in dry conditions, that Ferrari may have turned a corner. So we'll get into that afterwards as well. There is a poll running in the chat at the moment, guys, which is me currently asking you guys, what are the chances of Aston Martin and Mercedes winning a race this season? And the options are 25, 50, 75 or 100%. Let me know. Again, what are the chances of a win for either of those teams in 2023? Still, of course, Red Bull are too quick. Still going to take a lot of work from Aston Martin and Mercedes to get on the same pace as them. But they are definitely closing that gap, which I'll get into in a moment. But, of course, we know the results from yesterday. The top 10, of course, was Verstappen winning. Alonso, Hamilton, Leclerc, Sainz, Perez, Albon brilliantly finishing in 7th place. And then the rest of the top 10 was Ocon, Stroll with a brilliant last lap overtake on Bottas, finishing in P10. The retirements were Logan Sargent and George Russell. And yeah, it was a decent race in the end. Let's get into the championship standings and how they look now after this 8th race of 2023. So on the driver's side, there is one position change we'll get into in a moment, which is in the middle of the top 10. Max Verstappen, though, is now 69 points clear, I think it is, ahead of Sergio Perez. As I said a couple of races ago, the championship is over, but yeah, he is pulling away incredibly quickly from the rest of the field, and it is a matter of time until he wins the championship. The question is, of course, where he will win it. There's even a possibility at the rate he is going at that he might win the title officially at a European race. Something that has not been done since 2004, where Michael Schumacher won his 7th world title at Spa in, I think, August of 2004. So that would be seriously impressive. And yeah, it's definitely possible for Verstappen to be able to do that, but needs to relentlessly keep winning the next few races to have a chance at that. Perez in 2nd, of course, had another poor weekend, finishing 6th. He did get the fastest lap of the race, but was a poor weekend and was nowhere near the top 5. And he is now only 9 points clear of Fernando Alonso in the Aston Martin. And a very real possibility now that Perez will go down to 3rd or even further than that down the championship. Given his current form, he must improve starting at the next race, which is, of course, Red Bull's home race at the Austrian Grand Prix at the Red Bull Ring. Alonso in 3rd place, Lewis Hamilton 15 points back in 4th. And then a massive gap to 5th place, which is now Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari. Because Russell didn't finish the race, he is now down to 6th. Charles Leclerc is in P7, a bit closer to Russell and Sainz ahead. Lance Stroll is in 8th, but is a lot closer to Ocon behind than he is to the drivers ahead. Only 8 points clear of Ocon, despite Stroll being in a much better car. Just illustrates how bad he's been in 2023. Ocon in 9th, of course, he finished 8th in the race yesterday, grabbing 4 points. And Pierre Gasly rounds up the top 10. And when it comes to the bottom half of the drivers' standings, Alex Albon is the only big mover in the second half of the order, and he has moved up to 12th in the championship, and is only, I think, 5 points or so behind Lando Norris now in the drivers' standings. On the constructor side, there has been a couple position changes on the constructor side. Red Bull are, as we know, absolutely miles clear. I think nearly 160 points clear of second place, which is Mercedes-Benz, who are now only 13 points clear of Aston Martin, of course, with Russell crashing and then retiring because of excessive brake wear. That really cost Mercedes quite dearly yesterday. Because they couldn't take advantage of Lance Stroll in the second Aston Martin having such a poor weekend. So Aston Martin outscored Mercedes and have brought the gap down to 13 points. Ferrari have closed the gap officially on the 2 teams ahead of them. And, still in 4th place, but they're now 32 points behind Aston Martin in 3rd. And how many points? 45 points behind Mercedes in 2nd. Again, if it continues to be the case that they have turned a corner with their race pace, which we'll get into later on, maybe Ferrari do have a chance at coming back in the championship. I will be cautious, though, until I see further evidence that they can keep delivering on what was a pretty good race for them yesterday with some really good pace as well. Alpine are clearly comfortably in 5th place, nowhere near the teams ahead, and still comfortably ahead of McLaren behind on 44 points. McLaren 6th on 17 points. Alfa Romeo now up to P7 on 9 points. Haas are in 8th on 8 points. Williams climb off the bottom of the championship and are up to 9th and are only 2 points away from being possibly in 7th in the championship, a position they've never been in since probably 2017, which is 6 years ago. So it would be incredible if they were to get that high, and I think definitely it is possible. Great to see Williams rising up the order. Yeah, that's how the constructor standings now look coming out of your Canadian Grand Prix. But like I said, it's going to be a bit of a shorter stream tonight because we've only got a couple small topics, but also important topics to get into. Let's now get into the first and the main topic of tonight's stream, which is Aston Martin and Mercedes catching Red Bull. It's not just my opinion, it is backed up by evidence. So, of course, Red Bull in 2023 have been incredibly quick. They do still have the best car, but at the start of the season, they were, on average, probably at best for the other teams, 7 to 8 tenths of a second quicker per lap than the rest of the field. In Saudi Arabia, the following race back in the middle of March, you could argue they were literally 1 second per lap quicker than the rest of the field. It was an incredible margin they had over everybody else and their 3 closest rivals, Aston Martin, Mercedes and Ferrari. But clearly, as we've seen in the last couple races, and especially yesterday, that gap has come down. Now, I do want to clarify something before we get into the data. I know that Max Verstappen had a bird, I think, trapped in his car behind his brake duct, I think it was, for almost all of the race. I do know about that, but I haven't seen anything to suggest that it would have cost him an exact amount of lap time per lap. And, you know, hearing from Red Bull, especially Helmut Marko, he was actually quite impressed with, you know, Ferrari's pace and how, you know, much closer the other teams were. So I don't think that bird, you know, being picked up by Max, unfortunately, and I won't obviously show the image of it, which was posted on Twitter a few hours ago, because it is obviously very graphic, the bird that was recovered from the car eventually after the race. But yeah, I don't believe there is sufficient evidence to suggest that Red Bull would have been, you know, half a second quicker per lap in the race had it not been for that happening. We don't know exactly what the lap time difference would have been. And of course, Max was still very quick during the race, despite that, you know, issue for him. Of course, he, I think, made contact with the bird very soon into the race. I think he was like 3 or 4 laps into the race when he hit the bird, which I think someone screenshotted on Twitter that he made contact with the animal at the final chicane, the exit of the final chicane. So, yeah, just want to clarify that in case people think, well, Max had a bird, you know, stuck in his car that may have affected his pace. Again, I understand that, but I don't think we know for sure how much time it would have cost him. But let's get into the data. So in the first stint of the race, which was up until lap 12, the reason it was only up until lap 12 was because on lap 12, the safety car was deployed for George Russell hitting the wall, and you know, he obviously put a lot of debris on the circuit on the exit of turn 9. And obviously then, you know, Verstappen, Alonso and Hamilton pitted. And in that first stint, Max was only pulling away by 0.2 of a second per lap when Alonso and Hamilton were on the exact same pace. Of course, Alonso, for quite a while, was tucked right up behind Hamilton, had DRS activation quite a lot of the time, and was able to have a look a couple times at maybe passing Lewis Hamilton. But despite them two having that little battle up until the safety car came out, they still weren't losing that much time whatsoever to Max out front. So I thought that was quite impressive. Another thing to factor in, of course, is the Circuit de Gilles Villeneuve is quite a short lap. So the gaps between the cars are going to be smaller than usual. So I do need to clarify that as well. But still impressive that they were only 0.2 of a second per lap slower around, you know, this track up until lap 12, despite having quite a close battle, Alonso and Hamilton and Aston Martin Mercedes between each other. And then obviously, yeah, safety car came out. They all pitted. All of it, you know, pitted for a new set of hard tyres. So there was no difference, of course, when it came to tyre compound and tyre life. And in the second stint of the race, of course, Alonso passed Lewis Hamilton, I think, in the first half of the second stint of the race. Max Verstappen was still the quickest in that middle stint from lap 12 until lap 42. Lap 42 being when Max Verstappen made his final pit stop for a fresh set of medium tyres, the C4 compound, for the weekend. But yeah, he was the quickest, but he was still, again, despite Alonso having to pass Hamilton and still following the dirty air for quite a few laps, was still only 0.2 of a second quicker over that 30-lap distance, which I think is very impressive from Aston Martin and Alonso to be only that far off per lap, despite having to overtake Hamilton and be in the dirty air and worry about Hamilton a lot more than, of course, Verstappen out front. And if Alonso had been ahead of Hamilton at the restart of the race when the safety car came in, Alonso probably could have stuck a lot closer to Verstappen when that final pit stop came up, in the early part of the lap, 40 to 42 type range in the race. And then for the final stint of the race, of course, we had Verstappen on mediums, Hamilton on mediums. Hamilton pitted first out of these three on lap 40. Alonso pitted on lap 41 for a set of hard tyres. And yeah, Verstappen on lap 42 for a set of mediums. And from lap 42 until the end of the race, Verstappen again, the quickest by 0.2 of a second over Alonso and Hamilton. Lewis Hamilton's pace was really, though, quite impressive in that final part of the race because despite having 2 lap older tyres than Max, was on average 0.2 of a second slower than the Red Bull. And we know Mercedes, probably aren't with their car as well suited to this circuit as Red Bull are. So I thought that was really impressive, that final stint from Hamilton. The most impressive, though, is Alonso, because I don't think the hard tyre for that final stint was probably the best tyre for him to go on to, but still was only 0.2 of a second per lap slower than Max from lap 42 until the end of the race. And remember, Fernando had to do quite a lot of fuel saving and managing of issues in general to get to the end, keep Hamilton behind, and finish in second place. And that's why the gap really did grow towards the end of the race, because Alonso had to, certain laps, save fuel, and that cost him time. Also made a slight mistake at turn 8, which cost him 1.5 seconds on that lap, which does skew the data ever so slightly against Fernando. I did include that lap still because, it was still a fast lap. It wasn't like a very slow lap from Fernando. But if you take away the fuel saving he had to do, or the issues he's having to manage for, which Aston Martin talked about after the race, they believe they actually could have mounted a proper challenge for the race win against Max in the Red Bull if it wasn't for those issues. Now, do I think that he could have won the race, Alonso, had it not been for, fuel saving problems? I don't think he would have won, because even if he got within a second, I don't think the Aston Martin would have been quick enough down the back straight to actually, make an overtake. But I think definitely Alonso would have been able to have a go. The Aston Martin in the race yesterday, I'd say over the course of the entire race, wasn't quicker than the Red Bull, but it was close enough to be matching the Red Bull. Not for the whole race, but, at certain points of the race and at certain moments, actually. Alonso in the Aston Martin was quicker. Initially, coming out of the final pit stop, Alonso was actually quicker than Max, I think, for a few laps, and then made the mistake and then had to do some fuel saving. And it is clear to see that Aston Martin, and we'll just go on to them now. I can just switch on to them. It is clear with Aston Martin that with their new upgrade to the side pod and the floor, that they have improved their car quite a bit. And of course, remember in Spain, they brought a redesigned front wing as well. So new front wing, new-ish side pod design, and a new floor, quite a different floor as well from what they had previously. That is a massive upgrade, in the last couple weeks. And they have clearly improved by quite a bit of time, have the Aston Martin team. So I would say at the minute, it is obviously dependent on what type of tracks we go to, but I don't think Aston Martin are a million miles away from being able to at least contend for a race victory. Still work needs to be done. They still need to obviously, bring maybe a couple more upgrades to continue closing that gap enough to give Alonso a chance to win. But definitely it's possible. And looking at, certain tracks in the second half of the season, of course, the British Grand Prix at Silverstone will be just under halfway through the season. That's, a track very close to the Aston Martin base, literally next door to the Aston Martin base, you'd assume that the team will bring some upgrades for what is their home race. Same for Mercedes as well, because for their, where they're based, it is a home race for them. Yeah, Aston Martin, if they can just improve by another, say, couple tenths of a second, I reckon it is probably possible, not at every track, but at certain tracks, that Alonso in that car might be able to properly not just contend, but win a Formula One Grand Prix in 2023. Because there is no doubt whatsoever that, and I'll move on from this pitch and go to this one, there is no doubt that the new upgrades have pushed them a lot closer to Red Bull. Red Bull, we have to remember, their hands are tied because of the further reduction in the wind tunnel time they're allowed for the cost cap penalty, and because they won the championship last year. They can't really bring any big upgrades. They can only really just, bring the small little upgrades to the floor, maybe a slight tweak to the front wing, maybe a slight tweak to the rear wing. But Red Bull can't really do anything with their car. And Max Verstappen did admit yesterday after the race that the people at the Red Bull factory are now focusing mostly on 2024 because they know there's nothing really much more they can do with their 2023 car. It's already a great car, and they just haven't really got much more time in the wind tunnel to come up with anything that's going to make the car substantially quicker. When Aston Martin and Mercedes have, between 15 to 25% more wind tunnel time between now and the end of the season. And of course, the ATR standings in terms of who will be allowed to use the wind tunnel more in the second half of the season. That order will be different on June the 30th because it'll be now dependent on the constructor standings, which I'll go back to them now. It is, Red Bull, Mercedes, Aston Martin, Ferrari, Alpine, McLaren, Alfa Romeo, Haas, Williams, AlphaTauri. So Red Bull will still, of course, suffer from that further reduction and their, very much the limitations they have that were placed upon them. And for Aston Martin, obviously they had a lot more wind tunnel time compared to Red Bull in the first half of the year, which is why at this part of the season, right before it's going to be reset, Aston Martin have gained quite a bit of time because all of that extra wind tunnel time has caused them to close the gap a lot more than it was, say, at the start of the season compared to now. But we'll still have Aston Martin, another, say, 20% more than Red Bull for the second half of the season. Of course, there is a budget cap. The teams are not going to be able to develop their cars all the way until the end of the season, but Aston Martin will still be able to afford at least one more big upgrade to maybe get close enough to Red Bull. So they're definitely catching Aston Martin. There is no doubt about that whatsoever. And when we go to Mercedes were not as quick as Aston Martin yesterday. There is absolutely no doubt about that. The Aston Martin, and Lewis actually said it after the race yesterday, that Aston Martin have taken a step ahead of Mercedes with their upgrades after Mercedes took a step ahead of them in Spain with their new side pod and suspension upgrade and all of the, the new floor, all of that. And we said it back in Spain, clear to see Mercedes have gained a lot of time with that new upgrade and they're now following a new design philosophy. And they have definitely closed the gap to Red Bull by probably 2 to 3 tenths of a second, which is a pretty healthy gain at this part of the year on the Red Bull team. Toto Wolff earlier, I don't know if it was yesterday or earlier today, has confirmed there will be a big upgrade coming for Mercedes at the British Grand Prix at Silverstone. So hopefully another, say, couple tenths of a second will be shaved off gap-wise between Red Bull and Mercedes. And if that does indeed happen, then I think Mercedes are absolutely not far away whatsoever from properly fighting with Red Bull for a race win or two in the second half of the season. Definitely the Mercedes car looks way better. And another thing for Mercedes, which is a real positive, of course, we heard last year and even beginning of this year, they had massive correlation issues with, what they were seeing in the wind tunnel with their car, with the old design, the zero pod design. But with this car now, that correlation issue has now gone. So they have a lot more confidence now in the upgrades they bring, and they have a lot more knowledge and understanding of their car, which obviously makes it way easier to improve the car and set the car up for the best performance possible for a Grand Prix weekend. So, yeah, Mercedes looking much better, Aston Martin looking much better, no doubt about that whatsoever. And I would say, in review of this topic, again, if Mercedes and Aston Martin could just bring one more big upgrade, which can gain another 2 to 3 tenths of a second for themselves on Red Bull, then maybe at, say, the shorter tracks where we've, the lap time is only like a 1 minute 10 or a 1 minute 15 or something like that, like we saw in Montreal, nearly, or, back in Monaco, Spain as well. Obviously, we're going to the Red Bull Ring in 2 weeks' time. At those tracks where the gaps are a lot shorter, if they can make that gain, then at those circuits, they'll be right there with them and we'll be able to fight them. Of course, one race which I'm really interested in is the Hungarian Grand Prix at the Hungaroring, which again, short lap, pole position should be like a 1 minute, what was it last year? Like a 1 minute 19 or a 1 minute 18? It is a short lap. Let me just see what pole position was last year in Hungary. Just to make sure. 1:17.3. So yeah, it's a short lap. The cars obviously this year will be quicker. So again, it's another track where it's a short lap. The gaps between the cars are always a lot smaller than they are at, tracks like Silverstone or Spa or, Singapore, places like that. And given how as well, Hamilton and Alonso have great history around that track. They're always super quick at that Hungaroring track. I think that could be a Grand Prix where we see Mercedes and Aston Martin actually properly fight for victory. And that probably, looking at the races coming up, I think that's probably... But Mercedes and Aston Martin, that's probably the soonest race I can see those two teams actually contending for victory. Ferrari, of course, we'll get into in a moment because they have a vastly different car and different prospects at the minute, and obviously different pace compared to these two teams and obviously compared to Red Bull as well. But yeah, watch out for these two teams at the Hungarian Grand Prix. I think they'll be very, very quick there and will definitely surprise people. And maybe that weekend we'll have a multi-team fight for pole and the race win. We do know Hungary is not necessarily Max Verstappen's absolute strongest track on the circuit as well, which might help. But yeah, no doubt Aston Martin and Mercedes are improving. They are catching Red Bull. There is clear evidence of that. It's not up for debate. Just need one more big upgrade for each team, and I think we'll start getting those two teams definitely fighting for victory at only certain Grand Prix on the that remain on the calendar for 2023. In regards to the next race in Austria, of course, a very short lap. Mercedes and Aston Martin will be a lot closer to Red Bull than they would be at a track with the characteristics the Red Bull Ring has, which is lots of straights. They would be quite far away from Red Bull on pace if it was a much longer track, but with it being the shortest track of the year, yeah, they won't be too far away. But I think, again, given the track characteristics, I just don't think they'll be able to really get close enough to to fight for victory. And I actually think in qualifying on the sprint race, Ferrari should be Red Bull's clear main rivals, and maybe even for the race. And I think we'll go on to Ferrari now, because the data from their race is very interesting. So, yeah, let's now go on to the Scuderia Ferrari team. And yeah, they obviously started 10th and 11th. The start of their race was okay. They were stuck really in a DRS train behind Nico Hülkenberg, so the safety car coming out was a massive benefit to them. We did laugh at them initially for staying out on the medium tyres, but it was a really masterstroke from Ferrari, a brilliant decision, and it set up a brilliant race result from where they started on the grid. And despite what happened in qualifying and, having not pitted under the safety car, their pace was very strong. Let's get into it now. And Helmut Marko, like I said, he was massively praising Ferrari after the race and saying that, according to him, that Ferrari were quicker than Red Bull on both compounds, which is not true necessarily, but they were definitely quite quick. So, yeah, let's get into that data now. So, in the second stint of the race, from lap 12 until lap 40, which obviously lap 12 is when the safety car came out. Obviously, I'm excluding the laps they ran behind the safety car, so it's not all of the laps between lap 12 and 40. It's only the green flag racing laps we had. Verstappen, as we know, was doing on average a 1:16.9, 2 tenths of a second quicker than Alonso, 4 tenths better than Hamilton and the Mercedes, and half a second per lap quicker than Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari. Now, you may think, oh, that's a massive gap, considering it's a short track. How can that pace be impressive? Well, because Verstappen, on lap 12, along with Alonso and Hamilton, pitted for fresh, hard tyres. Leclerc, obviously, from lap 12 to lap 40, was still on the medium compound tyre that he started the race on. So for him to only be a tenth of a second per lap slower than Hamilton on, 12 lap older tyres, and probably tyres that were at that part of the race not the best tyre to be on necessarily, is incredibly impressive. Again, only 3 tenths off Alonso despite that tyre difference, and only half a second off Verstappen in the Red Bull despite that tyre difference. Now, what is the lap time delta difference between, fresh tyres and 12 lap old tyres? I'm not sure exactly, but it should be really around half a second. Maybe even more. I'm not sure of the exact data, but it is probably around half a second. Maybe as low as, 4 tenths of a second. So that is a very impressive pace Ferrari had. And if they were, let's say they started behind, obviously, Verstappen, Alonso, Hamilton on the grid and in 5th and 6th on the third row of the grid. If they had started on the mediums, which they did start on the mediums, of course they wouldn't have been held up then behind Hülkenberg and the midfield cars yesterday, and would have been able to, run not necessarily in clean air, but a lot more so in clean air. Ferrari would have been running probably at the exact same pace that Mercedes and Aston Martin were going at, if not a tad quicker, and would be probably the second quickest team in the first stint, again, if it wasn't for them starting so low on the grid and having to contend with that traffic. And if they had pitted on lap 12 and had, the same fresh, hard compound of tyre and had started a lot higher on the grid, then Ferrari could have been legitimately as quick as Red Bull in the middle part of the race. So the pace was really impressive. I will get into in a moment why Ferrari believe their performance was impressive yesterday, because they believe it is due to a tyre test they recently did. We'll get onto that soon. So yeah, for a very impressive pace from Ferrari, despite the older medium tyre. And then in the final stint from lap 42 to lap 70, again, Verstappen was 2 tenths quicker than the Aston Martin of Alonso and the Mercedes of Hamilton, and 3 tenths of a second quicker than the Ferrari of Leclerc. Now, this is less impressive, but do remember that Charles Leclerc pitted, I believe, on lap 39 for his final pit stop to go onto a set of hard tyres. And of course, Leclerc only did, just like with Sainz, a one-stop race in the race yesterday. So, you know, that's what, 3-lap younger, or 3-lap older tyres than Verstappen, who was 0.3 of a second per lap for the rest of the race and the final stint quicker. Now, if you were to eliminate the difference in tyre life, I think the Ferrari would have been probably at least as quick as Aston Martin and Mercedes, if not a tad quicker. So, in the race yesterday, I would say, if again, you eliminate the tyre differential when it comes to tyre life, Ferrari were probably the second quickest team in the race yesterday. And not very far away at all from Red Bull, maybe a 1/10 of a second at most, or maybe a 1/10 and a half at most, slower than Red Bull. Seriously impressive for a team that many times this season has been a second per lap slower than Red Bull in a race situation, because we've seen so many times they can't look after their tyres. The way the car's designed, it just wears the tyres out a lot more, I think because of the way the suspension is designed. They also had problems with, the car feeling completely different on different type of tyre compounds. It was, quite a bad experience. But Ferrari did do a tyre test I'm not sure if it was a few days ago or a couple of weeks ago, but let me just quickly find. Let me just quickly find what Leclerc said about the tyre test, because it was, if you're a Ferrari fan, it was a very encouraging thing to hear, because it may indicate that Ferrari have turned a corner, which of course we would love. Let me just have a look a minute. Meanwhile, guys, make sure to post in the chat your thoughts on everything I'm about to talk about so far. Make sure to post it in the chat. I can see we're on 11 likes at the minute. Let's try and get up to 20 likes or more if we can. That'd be great if we could. Let's try and do that. Just trying to find, because I saw a quote from Leclerc in regards to the tyre test they had, and how they found a much better way. So let me just keep looking. And I'll try and find it as quickly as I can. And I'm not sure if I can find it exactly, but I can find someone who is very reliable in the F1 community, who reports some of the the most accurate news, to do with Formula One, and she posts translations into English to obviously update, normally Ferrari fans, because I think she is a Ferrari fan. This is from Tammy at Vettel Leclerc. Make sure to follow this person, by the way, if you're on Twitter, because she is super reliable and good at supplying info when it comes to Ferrari and stuff like that. And normally she does translate the Automotor und Sport articles, which is a major, I think, publication in Germany. Probably the best publication when it comes to Formula One news, because they do report a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff, and it turns out a lot of the time to be very accurate. And they report, after the Canadian Grand Prix, Ferrari has taken a step forward during the tyre test after the race in Barcelona, which, if you didn't know, guys, there was a 2-day tyre test in Barcelona on the Tuesday and the Wednesday after the Spanish Grand Prix. The engineers found a setup with which the SF23, which obviously is the 2023 Ferrari car, is more predictable. Can't find the other quote that I saw from Leclerc, which was really encouraging. I'll have another quick look again. But yeah, that is the, I'd say the reason necessarily why Ferrari were a lot better. And it is great to see. Let's see if I can find it quickly. I'll just do one more search. Right, this is good. I found something that would be good. So this is an in-depth, a more in-depth kind of interview with Leclerc, which explains the improvements. So this is a person by that username that has translated an article from Italy. This website, I think, does normally report quite accurate news, so I think you can trust them. I've seen them quite a bit, so they are definitely a reliable source. Here is the quote from Leclerc in regards to the better performance. So it says, quote, "The people of Maranello did a great job to provide us in Spain with the aerodynamic upgrade package we were expecting. With the Barcelona weekend, we began the process of understanding it, and during the Pirelli tyre test following the Grand Prix, we gathered further data for analysis in Maranello. This weekend, the aim is to get all the potential out of the car." This is actually before the Canadian Grand Prix weekend. So yeah, might actually be the wrong quote there. Let me try again and see if I can find a better. Let me see if I can find like a post-race quote, if possible. Also, yeah, that at Vettel Leclerc Tammy person on Twitter reporting that Sky Germany did a report that, from their Ferrari sources, the recent tyre test was very helpful for Ferrari and understanding the car more, because, of course, Ferrari, you have to remember, they did bring a big upgrade themselves to the what do you call it? They did bring quite a big upgrade to the Spanish Grand Prix. A redesign of the side pod. It's definitely a lot more Red Bull, Aston Martin like, and also they brought a new floor as well. So maybe they're now starting to show the benefits of that and properly get the best out of the aerodynamic package. And with that tyre test they did, may have now understood how to get around their tyre overheating problems and just problems with, wearing out the tyres more so compared to the other teams. So, yeah, Ferrari looking a lot better. Great to see. And in Austria, I think there's definitely a real possibility with the way that track is laid out and the improvements that Ferrari in the dry in Canada clearly showed compared to what we expected, with them being quite a bit quicker than expected in the race. If that translates into or carries over into the next Grand Prix in Austria, I think they could get pole position for the race. Of course, the Friday qualifying session decides the grid for Sunday's race, and I think they've got a pretty good chance of winning the sprint race as well. Whether they can win the race on the Sunday, though, different story, because obviously Red Bull's home race, they're going to be super motivated for that, and Max Verstappen is so good at the Red Bull ring, so might be a bit too difficult to do that, but I really hope this isn't just a one-off thing with them, because if it's not, and it's basically a permanent thing now, that would really help our excitement, I think, for the rest of the season if Ferrari have made a clear improvement, along with, of course, Mercedes and Aston Martin, who have definitely made an improvement in the last couple weeks or so. But that, guys, is all I wanted to talk about. Before I go, though, I will come to you guys in chat and answer any comments or questions you guys have. Just want to say quickly, if you are new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe for more content like this, because the next 2 live streams on the channel will be, the next one will be in 10 days from now, on Thursday the 29th of June, to kick off the Austrian Grand Prix weekend with a weekend preview live at 8 PM UK time. And then on the Friday, I will be live only for qualifying. I'll be going live an hour and a half before the qualifying session gets underway to build up to the session, and then cover the session, of course, and do a reaction to it. That will be on Friday the 30th of June. And just to let you guys know as well, on the Saturday, I will be doing a F2 sprint race watch-along for the Austrian weekend, and then a sprint race preview and sprint race watch-along. So that is what the plan is for the Saturday of the Austrian Grand Prix weekend. And then on the Sunday, it'll be the usual race preview, race watch-along. Obviously, I'll be going live 2 hours before the race starts. And then I probably won't do, because it's a back-to-back, Austria and the British Grand Prix, with obviously Silverstone being a week later, probably won't do a Monday stream after the Austrian Grand Prix. I'll probably do a Monday stream after the British Grand Prix, really, just to go over what happened in both races, to see, you know, what teams have come out of those 2 races, maybe, you know, looking much improved, and what talking points have come out of it. So yeah, plenty of content coming your way. So, yeah, let me go through some of your comments. Sparky Pete says, Max will win every race barring an accident or car failure. Max has not pushed yet this season. Red Bull don't want to win by 30 seconds every race. I think in certain instances, I think that's true, but I do think there's been certain races this year where what do you call it? Where even when he's pushed hard, they've not been anywhere near as quick compared to the rest of the teams. They're still the quickest team. There has not been a race so far this season where they've not been the quickest team, just to clarify. So I'm not sitting here and saying Red Bull, you know, they're you know, very close to not being the best team in Formula 1 on pure pace. There's definitely still that. But, yeah, I think in Canada, I don't think him winning by, I think in the end it was 10 seconds, but I think a lot of that was Alonso saving fuel, the gap growing up to 10 seconds. Yeah, I don't think that was because he was, you know, not pushing in the race. I think with the Spanish Grand Prix, definitely he wasn't pushing. I think Red Bull in that race weekend were way quicker than everybody else. I mean, Max got pole by, I think, nearly 0.6 of a second, I think it was, or half a second, rather, in qualifying in Spain. But in the dry in Canada, even in practice too, we saw on the Friday, Red Bull weren't, you know, they weren't that great. Ewok saying Red Bull literally had wings. Yeah, that is definitely a way you can put it. Grillany says apparently Merc bringing huge upgrades for Silverstone, so Lewis win incoming, I think. Yeah, if that upgrade, as I said earlier, if it can put them another 2 to 3 tenths per second closer, I think Hamilton probably has 3 or 4 chances at most, and that, yeah, it's probably being generous, but I think Mercedes definitely can close that gap a bit for the remainder of this season. I'd say he has 3 or 4 chances at most between now and the rest of the season to actually win a race. Hungary, obviously we know how incredibly quick he is around that circuit. Probably could have won the Hungarian Grand Prix last year had he not suffered with, I think, a DRS problem in qualifying, which caused him to start a lot lower on the grid than he should have started, because obviously his teammate was on pole position. Yeah, so Hungary, I think, definitely. He'll be very strong there. Zandvoort, I think he'll be strong, but it's Max Verstappen, so he'll probably pull something special out the bag to get the win there. Singapore, maybe, but I could see Verstappen and Red Bull really showing strong around there. And then what else have you got? You obviously got the Mexico Grand Prix, very short lap there. And that circuit definitely should suit Mercedes and Aston Martin way more than a lot of the tracks we have on the calendar. With, top-end speed not really mattering. And, of course, that is something that both teams do struggle with in comparison to Red Bull. So, yeah, the point is there are chances coming as long as Mercedes make the improvements that really they should with the upgrades that they are going to be bringing. Let's find some of the comments here if I can. Skrillini, Austria could be a Lewis win, suits their car. I don't think it does. Because if you look at the first half of the lap, it's really just, straights, and the Mercedes, again, is not that quick in a straight line compared to a lot of the teams. The final sector, though, I do expect Mercedes to be very quick through there, but I think for the overall lap, they just don't have enough to win the race. Maybe snatch a podium if Ferrari don't quite deliver in Austria for the weekend, but yeah, I just don't see Austria as a real chance, to be honest. Alejandro says, I think in Austria the 4 top teams will be close to each other. Still Red Bull on top, but with the current state of Checo's lack of pace, an extra spot is available. Absolutely. Yeah, with Perez performing how he is, second and third is absolutely up for grabs at the minute. And we'll see if Perez can bounce back at the Red Bull ring. And yeah, I mean, obviously I don't want to get into this too much because I'm going to do my weekend preview for Austria in 10 days' time. But I still think overall, consistently, Red Bull will have, just about a good enough car to win, and obviously does help a lot. They've got Verstappen in that car, who is a god around the Red Bull ring. But yeah, Ferrari I do think will be very quick. Mercedes will be quick, but just not as quick as Red Bull and Ferrari. Maybe in the race if Ferrari do suffer with poor race pace, which I hope is not the case. Then Mercedes may be able to get a podium that way, but yeah, it should be 2 best teams really for at least most of the weekend should be Red Bull and Ferrari. And if Ferrari display this improvement in race pace again in Austria and it becomes a permanent thing, then really for the entire weekend, Red Bull and Ferrari should be the 2 best teams quite clearly, ahead of Mercedes and Aston Martin. Not by an absolute mile, but by enough of a gap for it to be a clear margin, a tenth or 2. Extreme Gaming says Red Bull are unstoppable at the minute, but I still have hope that Mercedes or Aston can step up, or stepping up at least one weekend where they will beat Red Bull either by luck or just pace on a specific track. Alejandro says Fred Vassar said that Ferrari will bring some upgrades for Austria to keep up the evolution on the new car. Hopefully more pace for them and have a good race. Yeah, I saw that yesterday. It being reported that Ferrari are planning to bring some sort of upgrade to the next race to go along with their new side pod and floor. Maybe Ferrari could be they might be the first team to break the Red Bull winning machine, which I don't think any of us thought was possible, but yeah. Looney Classics, Max is beatable for sure. Lewis is now putting Russell into his place. From now, he will only get better. Yeah, Hamilton is having such a good season. Much better start to the season than last year. A lot of it is down to just the car being better now. But also, we have to remember one important thing is that this time last year, he was sacrificing himself to do experimental setup work with last year's car, which a lot of the time did put him behind his teammate. But I will say with Russell, again, not performing well enough at the minute, as far as I'm concerned. The pace is there. He's just not. He's not performing consistently. He'll have like a good qualifying, then a poor race, or a poor qualifying, then a good race. He can't put at the minute the entire weekend together, and that's why Russell is now falling down the championship and is nowhere near Lewis Hamilton at the moment. Extreme Gaming, Perez needs to be careful if he underperforms. More like he has thus far. He's in danger of losing his seat next year. Someone else? Yeah, definitely. I think he will improve. I don't think he's going to stay like this, for the next, 5-6 races. I'd be very surprised if that was the case, but he has to improve very quickly. Looney Classics, if Alonso could not beat a rookie Lewis, how is he going to beat him now if they get equal machinery? Well, if they're in equal cars, Hamilton will beat him because Hamilton is quicker than him. Alonso, I would probably say there are certain areas where he is better skilled than Lewis. Or maybe not better skilled, but has the exact same skill level as Lewis in certain areas. But, if they're in equal machinery or the same paced cars, then, yeah, I think Hamilton wins that fight. But, of course, in Formula 1, the cars are very rarely equal in their performance, unless, of course, you're both in the same team. So, I mean, Alonso, the reason I think he's been better than Hamilton this season is because he's been more consistent than Hamilton this season. Hamilton's been very consistent, don't get me wrong, but Alonso has just been more consistent. There's been still a couple weekends where Hamilton has not been quite at his best. Saudi Arabia was one where he, just wasn't really at it. Wasn't really happy with the car. Miami as well wasn't a great weekend. Came back to get a decent result, but it still wasn't a great weekend. So, and with Alonso, he's only had really one poor weekend, which was Spain. Every other race weekend, he's got the absolute best out of the car. So that's why I've got Alonso ahead of Hamilton for this season at the minute. But it is very close between the two. And as I said yesterday, Verstappen, Alonso and Hamilton, in that order, how the podium finished, those are the three best drivers in the world right now. There is no doubt about that. Hello to Will Chan. Good to see you, mate. Alejandro, thanks for the great analysis, mate. Paulie saying thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. Will Chan saying Ferrari are basically Manchester United in a summer transfer window of F1. Monitoring FC. Skillany says, how about Max versus Lewis in equal machinery? Who wins? I think at the minute, it would have to be Verstappen because I don't think Hamilton is at his absolute peak at the minute. Hamilton is very close to his peak, but I don't think he's at his absolute best when Verstappen is currently at his absolute best. So yeah, I think Max would just about win, but it would be insanely close and insanely exciting to watch those two go at it in the same car, but it's never going to happen. Hopefully, whether it's later this year or next year or whatever, we get to see them in equal-ish, paced cars to fight for wins and maybe even more, because that 2021 season was incredibly exciting and also high quality. The racing and the skill, the talent, all of that was insane that season between those two. Alejandro, what is your favourite Austrian Grand Prix ever? The favourite one I've seen live was 2019, which I actually did a watch along for. You could probably go back and find it if you looked hard enough. Yeah, 2019 Austrian Grand Prix race watch along. Me and Nib covered that. What a race it was. Max Verstappen really is the reason why I think that's the best Austrian Grand Prix I've seen, because he started second, fell down to, I think, almost outside of the top 10, and recovered all the way up to win the race. And it was one of the best recovery drives in the last few years. It was so awesome to see. And with, the atmosphere at the track, with Verstappen driving as well as he was, and just the level of or the quality of the driving at that time and in that race as well was just so good, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Of course, the what do you call it? The 2020 Austrian Grand Prix, which was the first race of the 2020 season, was obviously a very exciting race, but it was for much different reasons, and it didn't feel that organic, really, that race, in terms of the excitement, because obviously we had a safety car come out, I think, a couple times, and then, some surprise late overtakes, and obviously a crash between Hamilton and Albon. With the 2019 race, there wasn't a safety car at all during the race, so it was all natural what happened. Skillany, so you think next year, if cars are equal, you're taking Max over Lewis? The thing is, if it's purely, equal cars right now, I am taking Max, but it's a lot more complicated than that, because in 2021, I still think that, there was a certain team who were quicker than another in 2021, but they were pretty much, a lot of the time, not all of the time, but a lot of the time, on equal pace, the two teams, Red Bull and Mercedes, in that title fight back 2 years ago. But, it doesn't just depend on, the drivers or the cars. It, ebbs and flows all season long as to why, drivers get results. If one team really upgrades their car well, obviously reliability, all of that stuff. So I'm not saying Max would beat Lewis still in equal. If it was like, if they were teammates, for example, I think Max Verstappen would beat Lewis Hamilton right now, because I think Verstappen is at a slightly higher level than Lewis Hamilton. But if Verstappen's in the Red Bull and Hamilton's in the Mercedes, and those two teams are on equal-ish pace, doesn't necessarily mean that Verstappen is still going to win, because, again, there are other things that come into why or what would decide the championship, as we saw in 2021. Alejandro, do you think that Austria being a sprint weekend, or with it being a sprint weekend, could be more interesting? No, I don't think it will. I hate the sprint, as I've said before on this channel. And I think it will, unfortunately, spoil probably what is going to happen in the Sunday race. It may, we may get some excitement in the sprint race, but of course, with the way, or the rule changes now for the sprint weekends, Friday qualifying decides the grid. So no matter what goes on in the sprint race, it doesn't matter in regards to Sunday's race. The only thing that does matter is it does show you again who has good race pace and who doesn't, and it spoils that element of surprise that you get in a Sunday race. So yeah, it's I don't like the sprint race, as I've said before. Right, I'll probably read out a couple more comments, and then I'll get to the end of the stream. Skillany, is it just me? But Lewis is slow at street circuits. Some of them, yeah, but some of them not. Depends on the year, really, I think, with Hamilton. obviously how the car's handling and how it's set up and all of that. Final comment that I'll read out is from Looney Classics that says, Checo was mentally broken by Max in Miami. True. No safety or virtual safety cars, but Max drove from P9 to destroy Checo, who started pole. Yeah, as I said during the weekend in Canada, that just destroyed him, and now he is nowhere. And I think in a way, and you may argue that, you know, he should be thinking he can beat Max Verstappen, but with what Verstappen did in Miami, with him still probably thinking that, or at least he was thinking that up until that race, it's now hurt his confidence and his, you know, the mental side of his game way more than if he was more realistic with his thinking. Because realistically, we know Sergio Perez is not going to beat Max Verstappen. Verstappen most days will beat Perez comfortably. We know this. And Perez as well is a number 2 driver. So if he was a bit more realistic in his thinking, he wouldn't have been probably destroyed as hard mentally as he was after Miami. Because I think he did genuinely think that he could beat Max Verstappen. When again, we all know that he absolutely could not. But before I go, let me finish up the poll in the chat. Thank you guys for voting, of course. 52 votes. And what I asked was, what are the chances of Aston Martin and Mercedes winning a race this season? And the 4 options were 25, 50, 75, and 100%. And the one that won out in the end was a 50% chance. And 40% of the votes went to that, with 25% being second, 100% being third, and 75% being fourth. Yeah, thank you guys, of course, for voting in that poll. So you guys think, majority of you, that it's a 50-50 chance, which, yeah, I would probably agree with that. Definitely would be too ambitious to say that definitely it's going to happen, or most likely it will happen. But I think we can't really sit here and say maybe what we were thinking earlier back at the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, where I actually made a video talking about how Red Bull could win every race. Obviously, back then, they were nearly a second quicker than everybody else, but that's not the case anymore, which is good to see. But yeah, thank you guys so much, of course, for coming along for the Canadian Grand Prix content ever since Thursday, all the way through here to Monday evening. Been great to have you guys for the last few days. And again, reminder of the next 2 pieces of content. In 10 days, we'll be back live on the channel for the weekend preview for the Austrian Grand Prix. And at 8 p.m. UK time, of course. And then on Friday afternoon, I'll be live for the qualifying watch-along for the Austrian Grand Prix. Make sure to come along to that, because, of course, that session on the Friday decides the grid for Sunday's race. So it is a critical session. I'll be live an hour and a half before the session starts at 2:30 p.m. UK time, all the way through till 5:30 p.m. And then, yeah, on the Saturday, I'll be doing a sprint race preview, sprint race watch-along, and an F2 sprint race watch-along as well. So Formula 2 coverage will be coming back for Austria. Of course, there was no Formula 2 or Formula 3 support races in Canada, as there usually is. And then, yeah, of course, on the Sunday, the usual race preview and race watch-along. Don't forget to come along to it, guys. Again, if you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notifications bell for more content like this. Make sure to smash that like button before you go, guys. We're on 18 likes. If you haven't hit it yet, make sure to try and hit it. And, of course, does help show your support for the channel and helps the channel in the algorithm and all of that stuff. So it'd be great if you could do that, guys. And before I go as well, if you want to keep up with the content on the channel, another way you could do it is by following me on Twitter at ChazHD5. And if you want to join our growing community here on this part of the internet, then make sure to join my Discord server, link below in the description. We have over 500 members, and it'd be great for you to join our community. And also, that is a great place as well to get notifications for when I go live and upload videos. And you can be almost, the first to be notified as to when I'm doing something content-wise and find out content plans and stuff like that. So yeah, make sure to join that server. if you want to be part of that. But guys, yeah, thanks for the Canadian Grand Prix weekend, and until the Austrian Grand Prix preview in 10 days' time for what should be definitely a better sprint race weekend than what we got in Baku. I really hope it is, or else I will lose my mind. Yeah, it should be a better weekend. Normally it produces good races, that circuit, the Red Bull Ring. And until then, guys, it has been me, Chazza HD. Goodbye.